Thermoregulation is the way animals regulate their body temperature, as in the name thermoregulation. This is going to balance heat production versus heat loss. Every animal, as we've mentioned, is going to have their thermoneutral zone, so their normal temperature range where their body functions best. In the last lecture, we talked about how animals produce heat. We talked about thermogenesis. Let's talk about how animals now try to control their heat loss. The control of convection and conduction from the body to the environment occurs through insulation. The use of external insulation, such as hair, feathers, and blubber, are all passive forms of regulation. Both air and fat can help control the flow of heat, and some animals like pinnipeds, seals, and sea lions that you see here are going to use both air and fat. In this image up here, this is actually a gray whale, and this pink layer here is all fat. That's all blubber. Both air and fat have what we call very low K values. This means they have low thermal conductivity. Heat is not readily exchanged through these medium. Therefore, both air and fat are great insulators. We consider these passive regulators because there's no behavioral modifications or activity needed to use them. Hair, feathers, and fur are going to trap motionless air between the skin surface and the environmental air to help mammals and birds remain in their thermal neutral zone. Insulation can help animals stay cool during the heat of the day, as well as warm when ambient temperature drops. Animals that utilize such mechanisms for maintaining thermoneutrality must have some form to regulate body temperature when the need arises. Some forms of thermoregulation, when an animal is outside their thermal neutral zone, uses convection to aid in cooling. Birds and mammals rely on evaporative cooling by sweating. You can see my daughter here glistening with her sweat after playing a pretty great game of flag football. Dogs use panting, and this evaporates water off of their tongue. Birds use something called gular flutter, which they flutter their throat or their gular pouch. And reptiles will use posturing. This turtle here has his legs out facing the sun to help warm him up, and this lizard here is basking on this rock. If they get too hot, the turtle could dip their feet in water to cool off. And sometimes you'll see lizards that are basking on rocks, and they'll push their bodies up, and that'll allow for more convection or air to flow under them and help cool them. These are all active forms of thermoregulation. Again, sweating is going to use water to increase the rate of cooling from convection on the skin surface. Effectiveness of evaporation is obviously going to depend on the relative humidity of the environment, the size of the evaporative surface, and permeability of the evaporative surface. Evaporation is difficult in high humidity. Therefore, some animals will seek microenvironments to alter their body position to increase airflow across their skin. A larger evaporative surface will be more effective at cooling than a smaller surface, but this does depend on body size. A smaller animal has smaller surface area. A smaller animal has more surface area to their body compared to their internal area, but not all surfaces are always suitable for evaporative cooling. Increased permeability can increase evaporative cooling, but you also risk desiccation or ionic imbalance, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So as always, there's always going to be a need for balance in nature. You don't want to dehydrate, and you don't want to become imbalanced. If you are an athlete and you're used to sweating when you play sports, you drink Gatorade. Gatorade is going to replace all of those ions that you've lost through sweating. Panting and gular flutter are both behavioral forms of evaporative cooling. Both panting and gular flutter are going to use convection over the blood vessels in the mouth to cool the body. Other animals, as we've mentioned, are going to use body position to aid in heat flow. We've mentioned that lizards can elevate their bodies to allow for airflow around them and help increase convective cooling. Turtles, again, will position their feet towards the sun for warming or away for cooling. Scorpions also will tilt their bodies for the same purpose. Cooling is going to rely on cooling the venous blood that's returning to the heart and the core of the body. And there are some specialized mechanisms that can help this. If you cool the blood that's returning to the core, you're going to cool the body in general. This cooling comes again from cooling the venous blood that's returning to the core. And this venous blood would need to dump the heat at the skin surface. The examples that we just talked about are using evaporation and convection to dump heat. Some animals have highly vascularized ears, like opossums and elephants, to allow the venous blood to cool through convection at the surface. Others have vessels on their legs, like birds, or their tongues, like dogs, for this purpose, and that's why dogs pant. Some animals use a countercurrent heat exchange to regulate this blood flow. Let's talk about what a countercurrent heat exchange does and how it works. Countercurrent heat exchange is a well-utilized process of veins and arteries in close proximity to each other. These vessels can transfer heat to each other or to the external skin, depending if heat conservation is needed or heat flow for cooling is needed. Arterial blood is highly oxygenated and flows from the heart to the body tissues. Venous blood is lower in oxygen. It's not devoid of oxygen. People call it deoxygenated blood. It's not out of oxygen completely. It just has a lower percentage of oxygen, anywhere from 60 to 80% versus 90 to 100 that arterial blood has. Venous blood is going to flow back to the heart and the lungs to become fully oxygenated after it's delivered its oxygen at its tissues. If the blood cools in the process of delivering oxygen to the tissues, the cooled blood would flow back to the core, the heart and the lungs, and cool the body core in the process of becoming re-oxygenated. So you can see here on this countercurrent heat exchange, when the vessels are far apart from each other, the animal would be in a steady state and heat wouldn't be lost. However, when the animal is in need of thermoregulation, those vessels can actually move closer together, allowing for this countercurrent heat exchange to occur. And some of the heat loss from the arterial blood can enter the venous blood, and the temperature of the venous blood would rise, and that would help warm the animal. The other thing it can do is when they're separated, this venous blood can be closer to the surface of the skin and allow for convection across that surface to help cool the animal. So again, the countercurrent heat exchange can help cool the body. If the blood cools in the process of delivering the oxygen to the tissues, this would cool the core and help cool the body. To maintain the heat, the countercurrent heat exchange allows that arterial blood to warm the venous blood so that it's not lost and prevent heat loss from the system. Vessels in close proximity, creating this countercurrent heat exchange, are generally going to be found in areas where ambient temperature would affect body temperature. Think about like your arms, your feet, your flippers in flippered animals, ears, the back of your neck. If you're overheating and you put an ice pack on the back of your neck, you're going to cool down pretty quick. A lot of times people will also put ice packs on their wrists if they need to cool down. Generally, vessels employing countercurrent exchange are simple vessels close to or crisscrossing each other. Some animals have adapted vessels close to the skin surface that are contracted while the animal is trying to maintain their heat, like in the dorsal fin of this dolphin, but then can dilate when the animal becomes hyperthermic and needs to get rid of excess heat. This dolphin is very well insulated with blubber that we've talked about, and in water, it can keep itself warm. Water temperature is about 60 degrees, and the internal temperature of this dolphin is about 100 degrees. So that blubber is very insulative to separate that water temperature, which the skin would be about water temperature, and then the internal body temperature is about 40 degrees higher. It's quite a difference. However, when the animal is on land, it's heating up really rapidly. It's very hard for it to keep cool because it is so insulative. Therefore, you can see some very fine vessels on this dorsal fin here that are dilated to help it release some of the heat to the air through convection. Normally, these vessels would be contracted, they'd be very small, and you wouldn't see them at all. There's another system called a REAT system, REAT Mirabal, and this is a vessel of networks that are crisscrossing each other that also work like a countercurrent heat exchange. So it's all of these very small vessels that are forming a net-like appearance, crisscrossing each other to increase the functionality of their temperature control system. The word REAT Mirabal actually means wonderful network, and it really is and can be quite extensive. This is on the inside of a dolphin, and you can see the lung here. So this is on the kind of the back of the animal. These are its ribs here. REATs are very extensive, and they can be very efficient at temperature regulation. They're generally going to be found in areas where body temperature regulation is crucial, like the gonads of cetaceans, the brain, and the heart and lung area. So far, we have focused mostly on creating heat or releasing excess heat. Animals have many ways to deal with the extreme cold, just as we have seen many ways to deal with too much heat. Some animals are physiologically adapted to hibernate when temperatures get too cold and food is not plentiful. Other animals have adapted unique adaptations to cold environments. We will talk about hibernation more throughout this semester, but in general, hibernation is a controlled hypothermia state where the animal is going to enter a dormant state. And again, this is going to be when food is scarce and temperatures drop. Smaller animals that have more surface area and less body volume compared to bigger animals need to avoid these frigid temperatures, and hibernation is one way that they withstand these cold temperatures. Torpor is similar to hibernation. It's when the body temperature falls close to ambient temperature, but this is generally going to be for short periods, and it could even just be like overnight or during the day in some animals. Some animals live in such cold extremes that they have actually adapted to withstand these cold temperatures by freezing. Animals that tolerate freezing are able to survive extensive ice formation in their extracellular fluids, and you can see that here. Only the extracellular fluid will freeze. If the intracellular fluid freezes, that would break the cell. Other animals can resist freezing and remain active at freezing temperatures, and we're going to talk about both of these scenarios. The animals that can tolerate freezing can survive days to weeks of freezing, again by allowing their extracellular fluid, the fluid outside their cells, to freeze while adjusting their bodily function. These animals will have no movement, no respiration, no heartbeat, and no blood flow, but they're going to continue to have low levels of neural activity and cellular metabolism. No animal would survive intracellular freezing. In order to survive freezing, these animals need to have specialized proteins that are going to organize the ice crystals in the extracellular fluid so that the ice will not damage the cell membrane. These proteins are called ice nucleating proteins. And again, they're going to direct the ice formation and cause spontaneous ice formation in the extracellular fluid. Ice nucleating proteins enable animals to survive up to 60 to 80% of their total body water freezing. That's a lot. These proteins are made as needed, and they're cued by colder environmental temperatures. Other animals are going to be resistant to freezing, and they're going to have special antifreeze peptides, which are, again, long-chain amino acids, or specialized proteins called glycoproteins, which are an amino acid chain with an added carbohydrate. These are going to lower the freezing point of their fluids so that they can actually get colder than the environmental temperature, and this is called thermal hysteresis. An interesting note about these proteins is that while they lower the freezing point, they do not affect the melting point of these fluids. This concept called thermohysteresis, where the freezing point of a fluid is lower than the melting point, these molecules are going to be produced seasonally and again in response to environmental temperatures. Finally, some animals are going to use a cryoprotectant. Cryoprotectant are polyols or sugar alcohols like glycerol, sorbitol, and mannitol that will protect the cells. Some protect the cell membrane by spreading the phospholipid bilayer and helping it compress and stabilize its structure. Other cryoprotectants, called colligative antifreeze, regulate freezing by increasing the amount of solutes in the bodily fluids. And again, very soon we're going to talk about osmosis, and you'll see how solutes are very important in this process. These molecules will provide an osmotic control and to regulate the cell volume, which will prevent the cell from desiccating if it does freeze. And additionally, polyols are going to be non-toxic, which is very important, and they can be converted back to sugar in the spring when they're no longer needed. So they're very useful in kind of producing that boost of energy needed when the animal's going to start feeding again. And like we saw with other points that we've talked about, some animals will use more than one of these techniques to survive extreme cold. These animals will allow ice to form using the ice nucleating proteins, and they'll use the polyols to protect the cells and the membranes, or they may use the antifreeze proteins to help control the amount of ice in the system. So these aren't mutually exclusive strategies.